Everybody here okay? Is that loud enough in the back? Well, I want to welcome everybody here tonight. My name is Jay Tolp. I'm the president of the Powder River County Farm Bureau. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to show up. Also, I'd like to thank the people at Stockman's Bank, Butch Bradsky and crew, for their furnishing the coffee and water for this evening. So if this thing gets a little long, feel free to get up and stretch your legs and walk around a little bit. We're going to try and run through it as fast as we possibly can. And we're going to have the question and answers at the end of the meeting. I want to thank also the speakers. These people are all producers or in the livestock business just like the rest of us. And they're in the same boat as all the rest of us as far as the prices that we're facing today. So most of these guys have busy schedules. They're donating their time and expenses to do this, and so I want to thank them right off the top because they're going way beyond the call of duty to do this. But they're facing the same problems we are. Now I'd like to turn this over to Rick Haynes of the Northern Broadcast Network, and he's going to MC it. And I also want to thank him for his time tonight. Thanks, Rick.
How about a round for Jay? He put this thing together. The way we're going to work this tonight, you folks that just came in, there's plenty of seats up here in the front, so feel free to move up front anytime. The way we're going to work this tonight is we're going to allow each speaker 10, 15 minutes, whatever it takes to cover the material, and then go into the question and answer session. So those of you that can take notes with your questions, or just, if you would, just hold them till the end, and then we'll do the moderation part at that time. I'm happy to say, as farm director of the Northern Ag Network, there's not one person sitting at these two tables that has been featured in the last 6 months in our programming, one way or another. A couple of them I hadn't met until tonight in person. Some of them we got the audio via another farm broadcaster, but that's what networking is all about. I feel that the cattle industry is, I don't have to tell anybody else in this room, but I feel the cattle industry is at a real turning point here. We make some real positive adjustments in the way we do business. And I trust that before the night is over with, we're going to have the opportunity to see some light at the end of this tunnel. Maybe new vision, new ideas on what should happen, what should come about, maybe some time frame for a change. If there's anything that we've been lacking over the last year or so, it's been time frame. When can we get this done? When can we get it changed? And when can we be right again in the industry? I think the panel that you have before you tonight is probably the most distinguished and strongest panel we could put together for one of these events. I do want to hand it to the county farm bureaus in Custer and Powder River and Yellowstone. They're the ones that decided this. When you set out on an endeavor like this, it's kind of hard to get this group of people in the same spot, so you have to give them credit as well. So let's get right into it. There's some things that will come out tonight. I think that you're gonna want to take notes on. So if you do have a pencil and piece of paper, I would encourage you to use one. First up this evening is the executive director of the Montana Farmers Union. George Paul is a man that we do business with from time to time at the network. They're headquartered out of Great Falls, Montana. For those of you that don't know where their offices are, George has agreed to be first on the firing line right up front. So George, if you come forward, help me welcome George Paul.
Good evening, and I too want to add my thanks to all of the members and the leadership of those local farm bureaus of Yellowstone and Powder River and Custer County that had the courage and the foresight and just wanted to get off the dime and put together this kind of a meeting. And in doing so, was kind enough to include an invitation to Montana Farmers Union. We appreciate that very much. When I got a call the other night at my home, it was in the middle of the evening, and Scott from Lewistown, he says, gee, I apologize for calling you during the evening like this. And I said, that's all right. I said, I've been waiting about 20 years for a phone call like this. and I mean that sincerely. I really do. And it maybe brings up a point that at some point needs to be discussed. organizations and the commodity groups that are involved on supposedly your behalf in all of these issues. And it's not a very good discussion, because it's not about all the wonderful cooperative things we've done together and the solid voice for agriculture that we present to state leaders and national leaders. It wouldn't be remarks like that. It would be a kind of shameful remarks about the lack of cooperation that has been between the various organizations. And for somebody like myself, who's been in this going on about 25 years now, it's been very difficult. And we have got to quit behaving that way. Because if I didn't ask, and I won't embarrass myself by asking, I like to say, how many farmers union members are in the crowd? Well, you see, I wouldn't know the difference, nor would your bankers, or any of your creditors, or your neighbors, or anybody else. Because you represent production agriculture, regardless of the flag that you fly. Republican, Democrat, Farmers Union, Farm Bureau, whatever it might be. The issues that affect you, that turn your gut when you go to bed at night, and that's first on your mind when you open your eyes in the morning, those issues are the same issues for people in our organization. There's a lot more that binds you together as Montanans and as production agriculturalists that separates you, but we haven't really behaved that way for a long time. So, not to belabor that point this evening, because that's really not the purpose of our being here, but it's a point that we all need to consider, folks, as we try to move forward. Because the divisiveness that comes into these issues is great. We're losing our strength. You know that. It's all right to say it publicly, although I've argued with some of my colleagues about that. They don't think we should talk about that. The fact of the matter is we're in a shrinking population, like it or not. We haven't got the luxury of being too arrogant and not cooperating with one another on issues as best as we possibly can if we expect this industry to move forward. And we feel very strongly about this at Farmers Union, because the industry is really so important to the state. How did Montana get here? It's a natural resource-based state. Now, that's not to say something nasty about, we respect tourism and we respect high-tech and we respect all of the other things that we need to make a full economy. We need a diverse economy. If we as a state can be criticized, it's probably because we went like gangbusters for the first 100 years, but we kind of bogged down in our basic industries. Agriculture still rings the loudest cash register in the state. We're the backbone of this state. When tillage began, people settled down. Rural communities were formed because there were neighbors. And they not only were raising crops and livestock, but families. And those families required services, both farm input services and other types of services to raise a family, like schools, hospitals, churches. You folks and your predecessors formed Montana. Why would we think now that industry, that something has changed and that industry is no longer important to the state? Look at your rural communities. Look at the shape we're in. Who has a rural community where a new business opened up? Where new buildings are being built? Where families are moving in? Who from what corner of this state can say, well, our rural community is in really great shape? You know the score. I don't need to tell you that. And the reason is because agriculture is the one who's paying the price for everybody else's benefit. We're killing the goose that lays the golden egg. Not we, not you. But those people that control policy. They've been so strong and so good for so long, they thought that would never end. Well, they're killing the goose that lays the golden egg. I want to read you a couple of things here in just a minute, but I want to explain first and foremost the purpose of our being here, other than to accept the gracious invitation, is to simply try to explain to you, to make it very clear what Farmers Union is about and where we've been on these issues that are the backdrop to the current situation, the trade issues in particular. If I say anything that is offensive, you call me on it, because I'm not here to chew on any farm organization or any commodity groups. And if I say something that seems offensive to some of you that are in one organization or another, it's okay, bring it up to me, because maybe I may misspeak or I'll say something that I don't take as offensive. The purpose is not to down-talk some other outfit. The purpose is to tell you what we think is right in the world, the important things, like putting profitability back into production agriculture. So let me make clear that what Montana Farmers Union in its mission statement, basic premise of why our organization exists, is to improve net farm and ranch income, period. Now we do a number of other things, but at every turn in the back of our minds, it's to improve net farm and ranch income. And again, why? Because if we can get jingle in your pocket, you'll fix the state. You'll spend money locally, you'll support small businesses and get the rural economy going again. You'll have families on the land that require schools, and you'll support them, and hospitals who like to have a doctor in their community. We've got to get profits at the production agriculture level. And the reason that's important is because later on we're going to start splitting up the word agriculture or the industry. Those words are tossed around too freely. And it's not only confusing to those of us in the business, but our urban audience as well. And as we are in a shrinking population and shrinking politically, our clout, we're losing the grip. We need to have a well-informed urban audience because we need their support. Let me say just right off the bat, here's part of the problem. Now, I'm not the smallest guy you ever saw, so you might have thought that I missed supper and swung by Burger King on the way over here so I could munch my way through these guys' presentation. Not so. Here's part of the problem, and then I'm going to digress. Burger King is not an American corporation. Burger King is a wholly owned company of Great Britain. It's a British corporation. They do business in the United States as our guest because the government allows them to do business here. And of course, just like so many foreign corporations, they want access to you. You're the biggest consumers in the world. So everybody wants to do trade with the U.S., right? At least they all got something they want to sell you. So to them, trade is kind of synonymous with sell. The reason I bring this up tonight, what did Burger King do last year? Does anybody know offhand? 250,000 metric tons of Australian beef was fed to American consumers by Burger King. 250,000 tons, okay? When we called them on it, and literally called them, dialed the numbers, talked to them, they weren't embarrassed. They told us straight away they intend to buy even more. Right now, their imports are 1/4 of what they cook and sell. They told us it's going to go to 400,000 this coming year, and then a greater figure after that. They're looking for 100% Australian beef. We said, why? Quality, they said. Does that mean I got that much left? Or
How much you've used?
Oh, God. Okay. You made a mistake. You said you talked for 10 or 15 minutes or whatever it took to cover the material. Anyway, let me move along with this. Their answer, frankly, was bone chips. When they said U.S. beef quality is not what we want, and we pressed them on that, the answer was there's too many bone chips in the meat. Is that your fault? Do you folks grind the beef that you sell? So we have to take care of identifying the word agriculture and industry. Start splitting it up, folks. There's production agriculture and there's agribusiness agriculture. You people are supposed to be responsible for keeping up your end. And you know what? They ought to be responsible for keeping up their end. Some processor, because they're too cheap or whatever, just sloppy work, whatever their problem is, by putting too many bone chips in the meat, it's going to flush this market for you people. This is part of the problem right here. I want to go back and read you just a few things, and then Rick, you rein me down, and we'll answer questions later whenever I run out of time here real quick. I'm not going to really do this to you, but it is indicative of some of the things that the Farmers Union has said over the years. Antitrust enforcement by the federal government is the answer to guaranteeing decent retail beef prices in the supermarket. Bud Daniels, who was then president of Montana Farmers Union, said, consumers obviously are losing out, but cattle producers also are losing out because of the lack of free competition. The date on this is September 9th of 1991. January 92. Canada shipped 25 times more live cattle into the United States in 1990 than American producers sent north over the border. And the importation situation won't get any better under an expanded North American free trade agreement. May of 92, cow-calf operators in Montana. Now I know how you feel, Rick, when you go to work. Cow-calf operators in Montana and the rest of the United States may be at hazard from cheaper Mexican feeder imports. Cargill's, I'm just reading excerpts here. Cargill's meatpacking subsidiary recently bought a meat processing facility in Mexico, citing NAFTA as a major reason, blah, blah. Farmers Union urges Congress to be keen-eyed in reviewing the ultimate administration proposal for adequate safeguards for American producers and consumers. Oh, June of 92, U.S.-Canada free trade agreement, a long way from being fine-tuned in the United States, when the United States imports over 13 times more pork from Canada than American farmers send northward. That was June of 92. United States last year imported $2.6 billion worth of cattle and beef. In a situation like this, you have to ask the basic question of whether the federal government is watching out for producers or for processors. The consumer isn't going to see a lower retail price for beef in the supermarket. You all know that. It only means that the importer processors will gain a buying advantage abroad and increase their profits with cheaper foreign meat. And they're not going to get higher quality meat, that's for sure, because we've got the highest standards anywhere. August of 92, more than 60 tons of hamburger has been imported into the U.S. from Canada. November, the amount of meat that will be imported in the U.S. this year in direct competition with American ranchers will be equal to the weight of 4,910 trained locomotives, in case anybody was wondering. The Secretary of Agriculture should immediately assign full-time investigators to determine how much Australian beef is being imported through Canada, which, when it comes in because of the U.S.-Canada agreement, then it comes in, it's not counted against the tariff, it's not counted against the import quotas, and it doesn't get inspected. So that's a nice little deal for those folks. A dramatic rise, this is January 94. A dramatic rise in the number of tuberculosis-infected cattle imported from Mexico. It's forcing the U.S. Department of Agriculture to take action, and Montana Farmers Union wonders what further threats to American farmers and ranchers may result from freer trade allowed. I want you to read you the one about buffalo meat. Buffalo meat can come in even as an import and not be inspected, where if any of you are involved in that activity, you have to fully be inspected. Rick is over here being a good guy, and I don't want to be rude and go over my time, way over my time. I guess the point of it is this. We got to figure out who our friends are if we're going to have a good future. And we're not the enemy. It shouldn't be Farmers Union, Farm Bureau, stock growers, grain growers, whatever, all split up in these little pods. First, we got to do something about that. And the Canadian farmers aren't the enemy either. They told me when I was on a trip up there last week, they were kind of laughing and said, for 2 years our government told us the problems we're having in Canadian agriculture is because of doggone U.S. farmers and ranchers. And of course, nothing could be farther from the truth. We've got to work, as you know, hard. But we've got to start working a heck of a lot smarter, folks. We've got to come together on this. We've got to be interested in, and I'll use that nasty P word, in protecting our own interests. I don't think there's anything wrong with Montana Farm Bureau or Montana Farmers Union or any other organization supporting the interests of Montana producers. If we don't, we're not going to have a future. Now, I know I've run over my time, so I'm just going to whack this right to the end, go over here and eat my hamburger if I can. But I'd be interested in with the rest of the panelists in fielding some questions later. One thing I do want to say is this: Rick said it when we started out here about a distinguished and strong panel. And these speakers are, I stand in awe of these guys, and I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing here. But again, I really do appreciate the invitation. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, George, and you'll be around here through the question and answer session afterwards if people have any questions for you also. George Paul, Montana Farmers Union. Next up, for those of you that just came in, if you want some chairs, there are some up front. If you want to sit up here, please feel free to go ahead and do so. Otherwise, you'll have to go back to the banquet room over next door and steal your own. That's how these guys got all theirs. Up next, the Secretary of Agriculture put together basically a commission of people from across the United States to look at concentration in the agriculture industry. Big wave of hope went through the agriculture sector, thinking maybe that we had suddenly found a vehicle by which to really analyze and take a hard look at what was going on with the agriculture industry itself. Herman Schumacher sat on that commission. I believe you were a vice chair, is that right? Of that, Herman's from Harriet, South Dakota. A lot of people, it's worthwhile to note that there was a splinter group at the end of that commission that were not all excited about exactly what all went on and the recommendations that came forth from that. And it's duly noted that they continue to discuss that on Capitol Hill, some of the recommendations and how they're going to work. Herman struck out and decided that it was time to start talking about this at a more local level, I would imagine, is what brought him here. He'll tell you more about that if you'll welcome Herman Schumacher, Harriet, South Dakota.
Thank you, Rick. First of all, we got to adjust the mic. Back where I'm from, they call me Herman the German, and if I go off in German, just stop. I'm from a town called Zeeland, North Dakota, which is 20 miles from where Lawrence Welk grew up. And, every now and then there's some people that hear me on the radio and they say, Herman, you sure got a funny accent. And, are you from Canada, maybe? No, I'm just from Zeeland, North Dakota. And he said, I'll tell him to tell you the truth, I didn't know a word of English until I started school. The usual reply is, what makes you think you know how to talk English now? So anyway, I am Herman Schumacher. I'm from Harriet, South Dakota. I run a livestock auction market there. I've been there for 16 years. Pat Goggins and Johnny Smith would be in the same field that I'm in. I'm on the agenda here today, and I'm asked to speak about my participation in the USDA Advisory Commission on Agriculture. I will attempt to give you a little background on why this commission was formed, and we believe that our Livestock Auction Market Association in South Dakota has a lot to do with this. At present, there are 46 livestock auction markets in South Dakota, with 41 of these auction markets belonging to the South Dakota Livestock Auction Market Association. At our annual meeting in the spring of 1995, we got into a big discussion about the cattle markets and the fact that we believe that there are monopolistic practices by the three major meat packers, and that had a big effect on the feeder cattle market, which has a devastating effect on the people that we serve, the producers that we serve. We as an association went on up. We came up with a form letter. We got them to every one of the auction markets. It was on a campaign to our U.S. congressmen and U.S. senators. We then hosted meetings all across the state of South Dakota with Dr. John Helmuth, a well-known economist from Iowa State University who has been involved in packer concentration since for many years. In fact, he goes all the way back to 1978. I understand that Dr. John Helmuth was also in Montana hosting some meetings. With our congressmen receiving a lot of these letters from our customers, and as many as 100 a day were coming in, it implemented Senator Tom Daschle of South Dakota to introduce legislation to have a congressional investigation on the meat packers. After passing in the Senate, South Dakota Representative Tim Johnson then introduced similar legislation in the House where it failed. And this is the time that Secretary of Agriculture Dan Glickman then appointed this commission that I served on. As a member of this commission, I had many frustrations with my fellow members. When first receiving the appointment, I was pleased to see that 5 livestock producers were on this commission. Incidentally, I was appointed on this commission representing industry. 4 of the 5 members of the were members of the NCA, or which is now known as the NCBA. It was clear to me that after our first meeting, 3 of the 4 NCA members were clearly on the side of the packer. They saw no problem with concentration, saw no monopolistic practices concerning the 3 big meat packers, which are IBP, Montford, and Excel. They viewed it simply as a problem of oversupply, and I'm sure you've heard that. The result of this put 6 of the 21 members clearly in the minority, which resulted in a minority report. We of the minority feel very strongly that this minority report has the recommendation to give to Senator Glickman that will fix the problems that we have in the cattle industry. And let me just quote a few of the more important recommendations. I don't know, I've got some copies of this report with me if anybody's interested, I'll sure give you. Number 1, the first recommendation, formula contracts that are presently constituted should be banned. Packer feeding of livestock should be eliminated except where the owners of the livestock own the packing facility in a cooperative arrangement. If packer feeding is allowed, the livestock must be offered for sale on an open market basis, and the price at which these livestock move into the market should be reported separately. Packers and principals in packing operations should be barred from custom feeding cattle for others. Packers should be prohibited from futures market trading except for economically justifiable hedging activities. We of the minority believe that these recommendations were implemented because use of captive supply endangers fear and distrust of market values. Fairness. Use of captive supplies, am I too loud? You know, I get that. I'm also an auctioneer, you know. And don't raise your hand, you're in. Well, use of captive supply endangers competitive operation of livestock markets. Use of factors within the control of packers as a base price for purchase of captive supply is a clear violation of Section 202. As far as the majority report is concerned, even though all 21 members signed on it, there's only one strong recommendation, and that's for price reporting. But if you want to really sum up the majority report, it's all in the first paragraph that our chairman of this commission, who was Dan Padberg, and he was a retired economist from Texas A&M, and I'll guarantee you he doesn't know much about the front end or the back end of a cow. Well, anyhow, in his letter of transmittal to the Secretary of Agriculture, I want to quote him now. He says, concentration and vertical integration in agriculture generally are associated with more positive results. Remember, he says vertical integration, more positive, including more efficient production. You people have all been efficient. More risk management, international competitiveness, product quality improvement, and food safety advantages. Now, this is what he wrote to our secretary. Folks, when he talks about vertical integration being a positive factor for agriculture, you're talking about where the poultry industry is today, completely vertically integrated, where the poultry packer calls all the shots and the producer is just a wager. Let me warn you folks here today that the control of the beef that the beef packer has today with only 3 main packers and allowing these same 3 players, these same 3 packers, to have 25 to 50% of their daily slaughter needs in their control, that the beef industry, and I repeat, is clearly headed in the same ways as the poultry industry. As cattle producers, we've always wanted and demanded no government interference in our business. But yet the government has chosen to interfere in our business on 2 previous occasions within the past 2 decades that have had devastating effects on the cattle market. And I'm going to remind you of the first 2, and I'm sure most of you can remember. The first one was a government-imposed beef freeze in 1973. Based on a public perception of a beef shortage, panic-driven demand drove fat cattle prices to $63 a hundred in August of 1973. I'm sure a lot of you folks can remember that. The Nixon administration, in an effort to stabilize the prices, imposed a price freeze with a devastating effect causing prices to go down to $28 a hundred by June of 1974. Now you talk about supply and demand. That was just 10 months later, coming from $63 to $28 a hundred. Secondly, and I'm sure most of you folks can remember the government-enacted dairy buyout program of 1986. This act influenced dairymen to liquidate their herds on a massive scale, flooding the slaughter market with over a million head of dairy cattle. This program slashed the fat cattle prices by $10 to $12 a hundred, including the feeder cattle. Just an example of that, just before the buyout program, we had a customer in there and he had 750-pound steers. They brought $63 a hundred. Just 1 week later, we went through about 5 limit downs. They brought $53 a hundred. Just 7 days later, and you know, at that time, that was a $75 a head loss. Even I could figure that out. This brings us to the present, where we are facing a new threat to our industry, which I seriously believe will destroy 30% of our remaining cattle producers within the very near future if it's left unchecked. This new threat has been termed concentration and refers to the massive consolidation of packing industries into the hands of a few organizations and the intrusion of these large organizations to also play the cattle futures with the apparent purpose of using their immense resources. And let me tell you, them people have immense money resources to intentionally control and manipulate the market. After government interference on 2 previous occasions, which I've just outlined, I don't think it's too much to ask our congressional leaders to get some legislation passed that would restore a free and competitive market. I'm sure a lot of you folks, like myself, ask the question, you know, what is captive supply? I'm just going to outline just one of them that I'm real familiar with, and Mike Calicrate has done a lot of work. You're going to hear a little bit more from him in just a little bit. And the one that I'm really familiar with, and a lot of you people have been approached by it, and it's called Packer Alliance Arrangements. Now, there are producer groups that have been formed and feed yard producer arrangements where some of these arrangements are formed by feed companies, in fact, most of the feed companies, which are incidentally, a lot of these feed companies are also owned by the packing company, whereby the producer retains ownership of the cattle from the ranch to the packer. The packer contracts the cattle for future delivery and may give some preference on the specifications in determining the price. Often the producer, and I have that personal experience, is looking for another arrangement the following year because they are disappointed in the outcome or because the packer wants to pay them less the following year. It is never the intention of the packer to pay a premium or more than the average for cattle. Forget that. Feed yards and packers are promoting more of these types of arrangements because of the difficulty to finding new customers. Most producers, when entering these arrangements, don't know that they're giving the packer more captive supply. Incidentally, I recently was asked to speak to the convention of the state cattle organization. While speaking to one of the board of directors after the meeting, I was informed that 16 commercial feedlots from Kansas, Nebraska, and South Dakota were in attendance. Leo McDonald was also there. This was up from only 3 booths there the year before. Only 3 feedlots there. 16 of them this year. It was quite evident to me they were there looking for new customers. My question is, what happened to their old customers who in many instances have supported these commercial yards for years and years? I want you to understand that in different forms of captive supply, packers have so much control that it's completely devastating to our market. I want to also point out that the NCBA does not look at captive supply as being harmful to the market, and their view is that the problem we have in the cattle industry today is just simply oversupply. That we, the South Dakota Livestock Auction Market Association, have challenged the NCBA to go in full support of the Tim Johnson legislation, which would start us on the path to an open and competitive market. And I also urge you folks here from your state of Montana to get nonpartisan support in there and support this legislation. This bill has been endorsed by the National Farm Bureau and also the National Farmers Union. These 2 agricultural groups represent more cattle producers than the NCBA ever dreamt of. This bill is very thorough, it's powerful, it has 3 major points. First one is to prohibit non-competitive supply. Prohibit is a tough word. The next one is mandatory price reporting. Not this thing that they just released about voluntary price reporting. We've had that forever. The third one is labeling, system for meat and meat food byproducts produced by the United States, just like the cap you wear or the shirt you wear, where it comes from. Keeping in mind that the NCBA is funded by your checkoff dollars collected from you producers, when you guys market your livestock, I will propose an additional challenge to the NCBA. My challenge is for them to begin representing the interests of these producers and to immediately stop the practice of selling seeds and truly be a national cattlemen's beef association. If there was only cattlemen on this board of governors rather than representatives from industry like the pharmaceutical companies, the feed companies, the automobile companies, and yes, even the meat packers sitting right on your board of governors. I just got to give you a little example. Just lately, John Lacey, the president of the NCBA, has written to the sponsors of this bill, telling them to avoid over-regulating the present competitive free market system. Imagine that. Your president of your NCBA saying to avoid the present competitive free market system. I would now like to direct my comments to you producers out there. Please stay focused, hang in there, don't be disillusioned by this temporary spurt we've got in the Fed market today. Just remember, some of your neighbors are no longer in the business today because they were forced out by unfair trade practices. And remember, you could be next. Many of you feel that it's the right of every individual to market their cattle by any method they choose, and I generally share that belief with you. However, I must also express my firm belief that we are all responsible to avoid marketing practices that harm our neighbors. Short-term price advantages gained from captive supply marketing activities may be tempting, but they assist the packer in achieving their goal of closing the open market and achieving total vertical integration of the industry. In the long term, we'll all be harmed. Before closing, I would like to extend my support to your community auction markets. They support your community, and I would ask that you support them. I know it is often tempting to sidestep the commission charges by selling to a country buyer. But your auction markets with several buyers present is the only place where you get true market discovery. In dealing with a country buyer, you have only one bidder. Imagine what it would be like if you went to your auction market and only saw one buyer present. This is what's happening to the people in the feeding business today. They have one buyer present maybe one day a week. Folks, try to sell in your local auction market. I would like to inform you folks, there's a lot of unrest in the cattle industry all across the United States. One thing that comes to mind, and you're going to hear a lot more of it, is the lawsuit by producers filed against IDP. The group calls themselves the Cattlemen's Legal Fund. It's being spearheaded by Mike Callicrate, a commercial feedlot owner from St. Francis. I'll let him get into that a little more. And I do believe that this man needs our support. I would also like, in closing, and finally closing, you're probably tired of listening to me, I would like to just quote from Lawrence Brown, a rancher from Buffalo. Lawrence, you would be here, would you? I don't know if you've ever read his newsletter. He calls it a newspaper. It's called The Deep Plains. I would just like to quote a little something. He wrote a letter to the Secretary of Agriculture, Dan Glickman. And he says, he's quoting Dan Glickman, he goes, "For a free market system to work, you need to have a free flow of information." Glickman told about 600 cattle producers in a telephone hookup. Clearly, we can do a better job of getting information out so that small and medium operations have a better opportunity to compete. That can be boiled down still further, he writes to Glickman. Accountability, a term that has little use in the marketing since the end of the Truman administration. We Aggies, he calls us, have been marketing our primary products, livestock and grain, with hardly a hint of national needs, world needs, commodity supplies, surpluses, or projections for nearly 50 years. Government commodity reports come out once a month, or a season later. They explain why they were wrong if they bother at all. Private reports are even worse. Successful American Aggies have made tremendous strides in increased productivity, grain, livestock, and economics of production. Yet we are told we must run fast, get more efficient, or get out. We are very familiar with 12 and 18 working hour days, 7 days a week, and the fact that we can't compete with the industry for the labor market. The heroes among us seem to be the ultra-shrewd traders who can completely milk the government subsidies and operate with the wetback labor. They parlay their functional greed into mega operations. If rural Americans who support their community churches, schools, hospitals, retail trade, and political system are going to totally be phased out in the favor of an ultimate in vertical integration. It's about time we are told officially that bit of accountability would make up for some of the sin of unaccountability. Folks, I want to thank you very much for inviting me here today. I'd be glad to answer any more questions, and thank you for inviting me again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Herman. Up next, we'll continue with our South Dakota delegation, I guess. Or excuse me, we don't. Leo's got to leave, right, Leo? No, teasing. Leo came to me about 2 months ago, 3 months ago, and since that time, you guys have saw what he's put in print. The figures that Leo has, he's researched. I'm sure he's going to share some of those with us tonight. He has some. If he can't grasp them all, I urge you to get a copy of what he's gotten done. I don't know how many man hours he spent on the telephone over the last few months, but it's been a bunch. Leo McDonald owns Midland Bull Test out here in Columbus, Montana. Rancher, of course, a very vested interest in the health of the cattle industry. Welcome, Leo McDonald.
About like a bear cub with these things, all paws. How do you like that? Can y'all read it? Only too well can you probably read it, but I'm going to read it to you. There is no stopping it. Concentration. This is an evolution that's going to take place in spite of whoever is in the way. That was from the July 1996 Meat and Poultry magazine. It's a quote from Bob Peterson of IDP. When I first got involved looking at these numbers, looking at the production and the supplies, imports and exports, and I'll tell you what, I bounced a lot of this stuff off Rick Haynes, and he checked back on me, and he kind of kept me honest along the way, and I appreciate that. But you know, you got to looking at the numbers, and you knew that something was wrong. You got to looking at the supplies, and you knew that something was wrong. You got to looking at the consumption, the population increase, the demand at the retail level. You knew that something was wrong. Back in 1985, and I can still remember that, on cold storage, they were hanging carcasses for 3 or 4 or 5 days in these reefer trucks because they couldn't get the stuff moved. We had a problem back then. Sure. That's a supply problem. I think back then it was more of a demand problem because we had a problem with beef image. Today, because of our checkoff dollar, and I certainly commend them on that, we don't have a problem with beef image. Beef's all of a sudden okay. You know, they don't have a veggie burger out there today that's lasted over 3 or 4 months. I read a deal in a magazine the other day, a meat magazine that's used by the retailers and purveyors, that said fat's fat, fat's okay. People are tired of bland food. You know, they work hard all day, they're stressed, they eat 50-some% of their meals out today. One of the special times they have is in the evening, and they like a nice meal. So they decided fat's okay. But anyway, studying these numbers and stuff, one more thing on cold storage. It just irks me. That's how you tell if you got demand. I mean, if it's moving right through the channel, you've got demand. Look at the first quarter of this year. We had a beef production that I believe was quoted by USDA, NCBA, Cattle Facts, anybody you want to talk to, that was 7% higher than it was the year before, and I believe it was the highest that we'd had since 1977. That was our beef production in the first quarter of this year. We rolled into April. We were 8% under for cold storage. You tell me that there isn't a tremendous demand for beef today. The other thing you got to realize is these retail stores back in the mid-'80s, towards the end of the week, they had steaks and stuff that wasn't selling, start getting a little dark, you know, they start grinding it up. You talk to the retail people today about what they're grinding. The only time they're grinding any of those cuts is if they grind a chuck because they're running out of hamburger. And most of the time they can take a chuck and throw a little fat into it and make more money selling it in hamburger than they can in a chuck. There's a tremendous demand for beef today, folks. It's just hard to believe. But anyway, I got off there a little bit. I got to looking at this stuff, and one day, it wasn't too long ago, before I started publishing a few of these articles, I was reading a report in the paper that said beef exports equals beef imports, or we're starting to equal beef imports. I said, no, something's wrong. So I called up USDA and ERS, and by that time I built a nice relationship with a guy named Steve Reed at Economic Research Statistics. And anyway, got talking to Steve Reed, and I said, hey, would you send me all the beef imports and beef exports since 1983? I just wanted to make a comparison. He said, you bet. He said, what are you doing? And I said, well, I just read this article that beef exports are starting to equal beef imports. And he said, well, yeah, I think that's right. And I said, well, I just want to see how it affects cattle supply and all that stuff. And he said, what do you mean cattle supply? I said, I want to see how it affects the whole scheme. Well, he said, if you're going to do that, you probably want the cattle imports too. I said, what do you mean? I said, I just read a deal that said beef exports are equal to beef imports. Well, that's the beef, he said. You got to look at the live cattle too. I said, oh, okay. So he sent it to me. I got pretty angry. I called Steve back and I said, Steve, this isn't right. I said, when you guys put this stuff out, you got to realize who's reading it. I said, 99% of us, when we talk beef, we're talking the whole scheme. Well, he says, first of all, we don't publish it. We put the statistics together. You talk to the guys that publish it. I did. It didn't do any good. They're still publishing it. But anyway, look at. I keep one of those up here. But just look at imports versus exports. Yeah, we're about the same on beef imports, on the chilled and frozen stuff. Climb on down there to the live cattle imports. You know, we brought in 2.8 million head of cattle into this country last year. We exported 95,000. There's a lot of people still running around out there that think that all these cattle that we bring in from Canada, and I read an article in the Stock Grower magazine, not from this state, but from another state this morning, that said that we're sending as much beef back to Canada as we bring out the cattle. We bring, in just Canada alone, we bring something like, well anyway, we bring twice as much beef out of Canada as we send back. In cattle, we bring 10 to 11 times more cattle out of Canada than we send back. But we're a net importer of beef. Last year we imported about 9% of our beef production. In 1970, folks, we were importing about the same percent. We've always been a net importer of beef. This country, us producers, have never imported enough, or never raised enough beef to satisfy consumption in this country. But you know, I'm going to quote something Pat said here a couple of years ago, but you know, when you got people running around telling you those half-truths and stuff, there's perceptions built about our industry, or perspectives. And a lot of times that stuff ends up at the people that have the opportunity to change some of the things that are affecting us. So any kind of time we can stop it, we need to stop it. Something like this, when you only put out half the information, and you're setting up a smoke screen so they don't get the whole truth, it's about like telling somebody they're half pregnant. Let's go to that next one. No, this is just something, I'm not going to go through all these numbers or bore you with it, because I'll tell you what, it is boring. But if you go down that side on the side that I'm on, you're going to see what the U.S. rancher produced for U.S. slaughter. The other side is the total slaughter numbers as reported by USDA, ERS, or anybody you want to look. The next line percentage that live imports are of our slaughter. And then the last column, I'm sorry, is what we produced, U.S. ranchers that were slaughtered. Look back there in 1988, I believe in 88, we had $71 fat cattle for an annual average. We slaughtered 34 million head of U.S. cattle. In 1995, we were selling fed cattle for an annual average, as reported by these government statisticians, at 33 million. Does that look like we produce more cattle? Yet how many times have we seen and read that people telling us that we produce too much cattle? I don't care what the all cattle numbers are. They're about the same, in fact. I don't care how many cows we have. The only thing that affects us is what we kill. And these are the numbers we need to look at, slaughter numbers. Look at what imports have done to us. You want to know where the increase in any beef production has come from? It's come from imports. NCBA published the other day that beef imports or beef production had increased 1.5 billion pounds since 1985. If you take the change in slaughter numbers from 1985 to 1995, if you just take those numbers times the carcass weights that NCBA or Cattle Facts or USDA puts out, it'll be over 1.5 billion pounds. We have not overproduced. Let's see. I'm just, let's go to that next one. Don't get scared because I'm not going to get into this one too much. I think all this one shows, slide that a little bit. That red line up there, that's what we, and I put this on a graph because I think it's easier. Nobody can remember numbers, but I think you can see some trends through there. The red is the beef imports, that's the chilled and frozen. The pink is the increase in live imports. Look back there in 85 and 86, and then look where we're at today in 95. How much imports have affected, live imports have affected our production. The blue is exports, the increase in exports. And yeah, we've increased exports. It's a good thing we did, because I tell you what, about all it's done is got rid of all the extra imports that we've brought in. We have become a marketer of imports. The gray line, this is the kicker. If you take imports and you take exports off, what's left? It's what the U.S. rancher has produced that's left for domestic consumption, before imports. That's the gray line. How can they tell us that we've overproduced? Tomorrow, those of you that go to the governance conference, and I encourage you to, it's going to be a heck of a program, but Cattle Facts are going to get there, and they're going to get up, and if you look along the top of those pink lines, they're going to get up and say, hey, and it's the same slide they were showing before, it'll say U.S. beef production. And they're going to say, look, you overproduced. I've heard 4 of them now. Not one time have they said that the increase in production came from live cattle imports. They said that you've just done a heck of a job and you've overproduced. Split that there. Okay, this is kind of a neat one, I think, because I think it shows you the effects of tobacco concentration. The blue is our exports. By the way, these aren't my numbers. These are the numbers that the Montana State University Department of Agriculture put together. I just put it on a graph. But the blue is exports. Look back there in 1988 when we had $71 fed cattle. Take off all the exports, take off all the blue and just top the pink, all the way up. That's what's left in this country with all the imports for consumption. You go to the top of the pink, that's what's left here. We had $71 fed cattle. But get over here, 94 and 95, at the top of the pink, and what do we got? We got the same amount of beef for consumption in this country, yet we're selling cattle in 1995 for an annual fed average, as quoted by people, at $66, $5 less than 100 on fed cattle. That affects you, $10. For every buck you put on fed cattle, it's going to put $2 on feeder cattle. Yeah, go ahead. Monday I got a deal that was sent to me. It was sent to all the media, and I'm sure it went to some of the government agencies, probably a few U.S. senators. These folks here said that price declines of boxed beef and retail beef were consistent with the $7 decline in fed cattle prices during the same time frame. And basically, they said it's what we've been hearing so much in the last year, and that we got a group of people out there defending the packers, and they're saying, yeah, it's coming down at the retail level, just like fed cattle are. This guy here was comparing the first half of 1995 to the first half of 1996. He said, am I in the way? Okay. He said that average live price came down $7, choice retail came down $7, retail beef, and U.S. choice anyway, the retail product came down $7. What he forgot to figure in, and this guy is a professional ag economist that publishes most of the data that is used to sway the opinions of some of our legislators. But you take $7 times a 1,200 pound steer, and that's almost $100. But that 1,200 pound steer only produces about $500 worth of retail beef. You bet. You take $7 times that retail beef, that's only 32 or 35 bucks. Live cattle came down 11%, retail come down 2%. Don't get mad at the retailers. I want to read you something real quick from the Jack and Jill Food Center. This guy's a super guy. He said, and we've been talking to him about it, retail beef prices. He said, here at Jack and Jill, we have not appreciably changed our margins on beef in 17 years. I talked to Super Value the other day, the distributors for all the IGA stores. They said basically the same thing. Their profit margins are the same they were 15, 16, 17 years ago. This gentleman goes on, the owner here of this Jack and Jill, he says, one might only speculate as to the high profit taker somewhere between the producer and us. I had some other one of these retails that I wanted to go into, but I better not for time, but I would like to take time to show that reform. Is that okay, Rick? Let's just go to this. By the way, I had a deal, a couple of these figured up, but just quickly, the packer retail gross margin since 1988 using USDA and ERS data has increased 170%. That doesn't increase the increase in profit. They went from 8% to about 14% of their total sales being byproduct. And along the way, the live animal carcass weights increased. You know, these guys are making about $100 more than everybody speculated. We can cut and discuss this a lot, but folks, along the way, we've got to have some solutions. And I'm going to try and go through this pretty quickly. But I've got some thoughts on this thing, and I think there's things that we can address. You know, I firmly believe that we can put quotas on beef cattle. Don't giggle, because you can. I got a, if I can find it here. Yeah, I can't, but some of you have read it. I got a letter the other day from the folks at USDA. Here it is. From the folks from USDA. If you don't think that we can't put quotas on, I was trying to get all the import and exports for poultry and pork and beef just to see the whole scenario. Here's what they sent me back. The reason there aren't any tables pertaining to U.S. poultry imports is that the U.S. imports almost no poultry or poultry products. Okay. Here's the kicker. Remember this. They went on to say the U.S. maintains very high import barriers to protect domestic producers. I like that. That's their letter. We've been told every time you get up and talk about import-export, they say, well, you're protectionist and isolationist or whatever. I don't know. I think it's just good business. But whatever you want to call it, they say, well, you can't have exports without imports. Both the poultry and beef produce about the same amount of tonnage. We exported 1.8 billion tons last year of beef. The poultry people exported 4 billion tons of beef. So don't tell me that we can't have exports without imports. The next one I like, number 2, is mandatory weekly price reporting on all imports and exports. You know, folks, we have a right to know. We have a right to know what they're given for those cattle before they come across the border. We have a right to know who owned them and who fed them and how long they owned them, so that we know how they're using these packers to manipulate our markets. You know, we don't even know on our exports. We see these choice all retail beef prices and on the retail level. You know, that doesn't include hotel restaurant trade. It doesn't include exports. It doesn't include our high dollar cuts. We need mandatory weekly price reporting on all imports and exports. Number 3, we need labeling and source identification on all beef and live cattle imports. I mean, it's just ridiculous that we don't have it. Shoot, and most other commodities do. It just flabbergasts me. There's some of this stuff coming into this country from south of the border or north of the border where they're using pesticides or herbicides or animal drugs that have been banned from the use of this country. If they can roll in with those contaminated animals or carcasses, feed them out here and get a USDA quality grade on them. Something's wrong with that. They need to be source identified. They need to be labeled where it came from. The USDA number 4, and I've got to thank Rick Haynes for this one. And by the way, we got part of this through NCBA. Thank you. Not all of it. They took some teeth out, but by golly, we got some of it done, and you can thank the stock growers for getting that done. But the USDA quality grade stamp will only be used on U.S. raised, fed, and processed cattle. Folks, this is terrible. I mean, where's my wife? Sammy. Embarrass her. We're coming in tonight. We passed 2 Canadian reefer trucks. Now, I don't know what was in them, but there's a pretty good chance they had some swinging carcasses in there. You know, I don't know, but God dang, what iron. But they're taking these carcasses out of Canada. They're shipping them down to Colorado or wherever, I suppose Montford. They're hanging them up. They've never been federally inspected on the hook. How could they? I don't think we have a federal inspector up in Canada. And they're putting a USDA choice quality grade on that stuff. That is ours. And we need to protect it. I'll tell you the other kicker is, you know, you try and send some cattle up there. They cuss about this blue tongue and stuff. And one of these gentlemen referred to it earlier. But in the last 2 or 3 years, they've had 70 outbreaks of TB in Canada. That's underlying fever. Who cares about the sheep when we're talking about people's lives? We need to get tougher as businessmen when we're dealing with these people. And we have some friends up there. Number 5, request or demand for the immediate enforcement of the free and empowered action of the USDA packers and stockyards. I'm not even going to go into that. Mike will touch on that. All I'm going to say is Jim Baker has got to go. That guy's not doing his job. If he was working for you or me, he'd have been canned. Number 6, we need the immediate freeze on further acquisitions of additional slaughter facilities by the big 3. And again, Rick helped me with this one. Thank you. That's IBB, ConAgra, and Cargill. I mean, what more needs to be said? They're rubbing our nose in it, you know. The other thing that I did put on there is packers should not be able to own fed cattle. And packers should not be able to own buyer stations. If a stockyard operator in Billings, Montana can't own a packing plant, then I say a packer should not be able to own a buyer station. Fair is fair. We need to get tough about this. Number 7, we need mandatory daily price reporting at all segments. We've heard all about it. The only thing I'm going to say is you know, they're still talking about voluntary reporting. That's about like letting O.J. Simpson be his own prosecutor. But it didn't really matter. Number 8, you need to look at the CME and futures. You know, Mike Callicrate hopefully will talk on this, but packers should not be allowed to be able to go short. And we need to reduce the number of contracts people can own. Number 9, we need to encourage cattle feeders to move away from the show list and move more into a value-based system. Instead of selling the whole feedlot that day at the same price. I mean, they sell your cattle, your good cattle at $61, and they sell somebody else's Brahma cattle at $61. They sell the whole deal. That's not value-based marketing. The other thing about mandatory price reporting, folks, if they want to talk about value-based marketing, You cannot have value-based marketing without 100% mandatory price reporting. Number 10, ranchers need to get involved, and it's tough, you know. We get frustrated sometimes with the associations and stuff. You and I are the only ones that can change this thing. It's not going to be done on a national level. It's got to start at the state level. And you've got to get involved. I just can't stress that enough. Number 11, I'm not going to go into this a whole lot, but since NCBA is the perceived voice of the cattleman, and that voice has certainly been strengthened with the recent merger of the checkoff, then we need to deal with the inadequacies in NCBA's representation of the cow-calf man and the stalker operator, of you and I. We need an equal vote on every committee, and right now we don't. The cattle feeders have way more votes than you and I have. And we need a change in the staff. And we need it now. And through that check. Number 12, all our state associations, and boy, you know, this is what's going to make or break everything I've just talked about. The Farm Bureau, Farmers Union, Montana Stock Growers. You guys, you leaders, you've got to set aside your differences for this one. You've got to come together and sit down. And what I'd like to propose is that you sit down, that you get an immediate contract of action together, that you get the cattle women's or whoever else, and you make sure that every politician in this state and the bordering states signs that immediate contract of action to deal with this, or else you publish that he wouldn't sign it. And I'll guarantee you what, you'll get well over 90% of the communities, the chambers of commerces in this state, to back you up on this one, because they're feeling it in these rural communities. I'm done. I won't go any farther. Thanks for having me here. God bless you.
Very nicely done, Leo. I don't know how you got through all that in the limited amount of time you had. Do you have copies of those numbers for people?
I can get them.
He can get you copies, he said, if you talk to him. Just call him out at the bolt test. He'll crank up the copy machine again. Appreciate it, Leo. Up next on our agenda tonight is Johnny Smith. Johnny owns Fort Pierre Livestock. He also serves as president of the South Dakota Livestock Markets Association. Johnny, very heavily involved in the endeavors here of late. Would you come forward, please? Welcome him, if you will, this evening.
Well, thank you, Rick. Thank you, Jay, for inviting us. And Leo, you leave a pretty tough act to follow. But you've got a lot of good things there, and Leo McDonald has done a tremendous job of putting a lot of things together on the cattle production. But my name is Johnny Smith, and I'm one of the partners in the Fort Pierre Livestock Auction in Fort Pierre, South Dakota. I'm also the president of the South Dakota Livestock Auction Markets Association. And maybe some of you have heard of some of the things we've done here in the past. We've been doing quite a bit in this packer concentration. As you know, Herman has been in the advisory committee in Washington, D.C. and St. Louis and different places where they have meetings and so forth. And I happen to go along with him and do a little reporting for him and kind of help him out a little bit when the guys wanted to gang up on him. As you know, he was on the minority report, so he needed a little extra help. But I'm here tonight to kind of give you a little talk about some of the things that are affecting the cattle industry. First of all, I'd just like to ask some of you, how many of you raise calves for a living? How many of you sell your calves? Quite a lot of you. How many of you run yearlings? Background and stuff like that. How many of you feed them clear out? I've got quite a few of them for Montana. Well, how many of you think you overproduced? Now that's been my pet peeve, and I've read about it since the beginning of the cattle history, back in the early 1880s and 90s. That was their big thing back in 1880 when they had an investigation of the packing industry, and back in the early 1900s, and when they finally broke up the packing, plans for having a monopoly. That was still their big cry, is overproduction. Well, that is our big cry yet here at this time. We're being told that we overproduced and things like this. Now, if you really believe that, I guess you would also believe in the tooth fairy. Have you seen a lot of it rotting on the docks, the packing plant? Have you seen them lowering the price at the grocery store to get rid of it? This is what really amazes me. Yet our own organizations that are supposed to be representing us sit around and talk about how we overproduced and did this and that, but they can't give you any explanation about how we did overproduce. They don't ever mention all the imports we had coming in out of Canada and Mexico or things like this. And it's kind of a insulting thing that we just recently got done with the Olympics. You know about the first 3 days of the Olympics, the big headlines were, where's the beef? Now we raise the greatest products in the world. These people come from all over the world to the Olympics down in Atlanta. You know what? They want to eat beef. That's something they can't get in their country. They don't get our good beef. They tell us, our organizations tell us how damn bad our meat is because it's tough and it's this and it's that, and we got to do more investigations and all this kind of stuff. But here's all these people from all over the world that come to Atlanta to watch the Olympics. They come there and they want to eat beef. First 3 days, they're out. This makes the headline. You know what? We got overproduction someplace, right? That's a heck of a thing. I said, isn't that a hell of a thing to have a deal like this? They tell us how much overproduction we have, yet we can't get enough beef for these people down there. So I'll go kind of carry on here a little bit and tell you some of the things that's happened in this industry. According to our representative, Tim Johnson from South Dakota, they've done an investigation in Washington, D.C. on what our prices were here last spring. And through the price of everything else and the inflation factors figuring in, we, this spring, in the first 6 months of this year, we're getting the lowest prices in the history of the packing industry, according to the inflation and everything figured in. That's a flat disgrace. That is a flat disgrace. And I think that it's brought about by three things. The packer concentration, captive supply, NAFTA and GATT. I believe our own organization that's supposed to be representing us, NCBA, has something to do with this. First of all, on packer concentration. There's three big packers. IBD, they've got about 40% of the kill. Cargill's got about 21.5% of the kill, that's XL. And Montford has about 20.5%. So 1981, when Reagan deregulated the consent decree, these packers have grown, become the largest or the fastest growing shared monopoly in the history of the world. In 1981, they had a little over 30% of the fed cattle kill. 1985, they had 50%. In 1990, they had 70%. And of 1995, we got between 82 and 85% of the kill. These people have continually eliminated our market under the guise of value-based marketing. The packer talks the price discovery, yet they have completely eliminated it through things like captive supply, which will include forward contracting. This is contracting your cattle way out ahead of time. Importing Mexican and Canadian cattle. Owning and feeding their own cattle. And then, of course, the formula. Does everybody know what the formula is? How many people know what the formula is? This is a situation where you don't sell your cattle at the feedlot. It's a lazy man's way of selling the cattle or a way to finally get your cattle gone. What they do is they commit the cattle to kill without putting a price on them. So the packer doesn't have any price on them. All he knows is he's going to be killing the guy's cattle, so you don't have to bid on that many cattle for the following week. These cattle are killed. The average of the week is taken, and these cattle are paid for the average for the week. Now, how's that for competition? None. That's what it is. And they call this value-based marketing. You people in Montana, us down in South Dakota, raise the greatest cattle in the world. I'm telling you right now, they don't come any better than you and us raising them. And I think Mr. Goggins right there will go along with that little thing. Yet, through this formula pricing, down here, the Mexican cattle come in, they're fed down here, we'll say at Cactus Feedlot, for example, down in Texas there. These 30 centers or 40 centers, whatever you call them. They're fed there in Texas. They go on the formula. These cattle bring the same price as yours do. And they couldn't carry water to them. That's what's so disgusting about some of the things happening in our business. Here these people commit these cattle up here to the cattle, and the cattle are $10, $20, $30, $100 better cattle. Yet they got to take the same price as they do on these Mexican cattle coming in down south there. Yeah, when they bid like 62 or 65 bucks here today, what, 65 today, Herman, 66? They did the same thing in Montana, they did the same thing in South Dakota, they did the same thing in Texas. And I'll tell you what, your cattle will out-yield them, outdo, out everything. But we still got to stick the same hit for this type of thing. So that's what I got to say a little about this value-based marketing. The only place you get any value-based marketing anymore is at your auction market. Here's where the good cattle bring a premium, the cattle that are inferior bring less. But this is value-based marketing. Our packing industry talks about value-based marketing and price discovery. What is their value based on? The goodness of their heart. That's what. Now you figure that out. It's not based on what they get across the retail counter. If you wanted to get something, real value-based marketing, if you pay with the consumer, go right back down the line, we'd somehow come out of the trickle-down effect some way, or should. But that's not the situation. Our value-based marketing is based on the goodness of the packing industry's heart. There's not one there. So, what happens there? Now I got just a little bit to tell you about the recent things that have happened here. Secretary Glickman appointed a commission. They had Herman there and 21 people on this thing, and they've done a lot of hard work. And they spent a lot of their own money. They spent all their own money going to these meetings in Washington, St. Louis, and Washington again. And by golly, it was darn expensive. They got $110, $20 hotel rooms, which you're going to get close to the Capitol, you know. And they're within cab distance. That's another $40, $50 every time you get a hold of them. So you learn how to ride that underground outfit and get lost a lot. But anyway, these people spend a lot of money going and trying to do something for this. There were 6 people that were conscientious about the producers. The rest of the people were corporate America, or strategically aligned some way with the corporation. Herman and these people tried to have a minority report, and they did have one. It made sense. But what did they come up with? Just last week here come Secretary Glickman come out. Guess what he came out with? Big thing. Voluntary price reporting. Wasn't that a wonderful deal? We've only had it for 15, 20 years, what the hell? You know? Wasn't that something to come out with? He had 10 points on it. The only thing in that whole thing that meant anything at all was that they was going to tell us which packing plants the Canadian and Mexican cattle were going to, and how many. Absolutely the only thing of all 10 points. If that wasn't the most ridiculous line of BS I'd ever seen, and who said it was great? The American Meat Institute, which represents the packing industry, thought it was a wonderful thing. The American Meat Institute, NCBA, and Cattle Tax. There's 2 organizations supposed to be helping us out. Well, I'll get on with this thing because there's a lot more things to be said. One thing about it, we get into NAFTA and GATT. And what did we have to gain from Canada and Mexico? Canadian people, wonderful people, nicest people in the world. We've been up there several different times, and I really enjoy it. They're all nice to us. But what did we have to gain from them? Money's worth 35% less, but they did have a lot of cattle, a lot of hogs, a lot of grain. And I'm told they're enlarging the feedlots and every one of them up there. They've also, their 2 largest packers now are owned by XL and IVP. But that's nothing new because XL and IVP own other packing plants. Along with Conagra, or License in Montford. Australia. Conagra is the largest packing plant in Australia. Also, Cargill or XL. In Mexico, the largest plant is owned by Cargill. You get down in South America. They've got 225 million cattle in South America. And guess who our plants are down there? So that's kind of the way that goes down there. That's a little bit on our Canadian deal. Then Mexico. Now what did they have to offer us? People, poverty, cheap labor, and a peso worth nothing. They told us that, well, the reason we got NAFTA in Mexico is they're going to bring their standard of living up to ours. Now, how's that? Now, what would you think is happening? Maybe they're moving ours down to theirs. So anyway, their peso worth nothing, so our government comes along and says, we're going to bail them out, we'll give them 40 billion. Not 40 million, 40 billion. So they did. Well, it still wasn't working best. But after you get to thinking about Mexico, there's 31 families in Mexico that control 80% of the wealth. Now, do you suppose that little Mexican fellow that swims across the border is carrying so much gold in his pocket that he's coming back here to spend it? That's not the way it works. I think we're in a political season, and I thought Pat Buchanan had quite a thing to say about that down in Iowa. He said it's amazes him that there in Iowa there's a little toy factory called Ertl Toys. Now they hire 300 people there. They're paid average $9 an hour. And now they're moving to Mexico. They're going to have 300 work there. They're going to give them $1.50 a day. That's why I say free trade is for those who control the trade. Now, my friends, we've got 3 huge companies that are holding the whole industry hostage. With no price discovery left in the cattle industry, it's not supply and demand, it's they'll demand your supply. Ask any feedlot manager or owner about competition amongst the big 3, how often it is that he has 3 packers stuff in his yards, and how often he gets a bid from all 3. Usually if he gets 1 day a week, he gets 1 hour during the week to get a bid on the cattle. That's a good thing. But these feedlot operators operate in constant fear of not having anyone come and bid in their cattle. But you won't hear many of them say anything bad about the packers, except my friend Mike Krause right over there. He's going to tell you quite a lot about it in just a little bit. Now, like I said, during this last year, we've been trying to get Congress to investigate with subpoena powers. Yet who should be against their investigation at every turn? The NCA, National Cattlemen's Association. Here's an organization that is supposed to be for the best interest of the cattle industry. They should be leading the charge against packer concentration, yet they're heading us off the path at every stop. If you're a congressman or a senator and don't have know anything about the cattle industry, who would you ask? We have the NCA lobbyists right there in Washington, D.C. By golly, I'll tell you what, all they could come up with is oversupply, overproduction. And they never did mention anything about the importation of cattle. As Leo told you a lot about the importation of cattle there, not much use going into that, but I am going to tell you that last year, 1995, we had over 1.7 million cattle, more than ever before coming into this country. They'll say, yeah, you killed them. You killed more too. We did. We killed 1.2 million more. That still left 500,000 cattle coming in out of Canada and Mexico. But we didn't overproduce. We just bought them in. And here your own organization wouldn't mention anything about this. Now the NCAA is supposedly made up of 40,000 members. My friends, I'll tell you, 90% of the folks are darn good grassroots, hard-working people. They're working hard to keep the ranch. But the hierarchy of this organization has been infiltrated over the last few years by the packers, commodity brokers, pharmaceutical companies, large feedlots, lawyer cowboys, and a handful of puppets, all with expense accounts. They've got a board of governors now, 481 members on it, a lot of pharmaceutical companies on it, and a lot of feed companies, the packers, even got Buick Motors. They say, well, we're just taking them in there kind of for, like hanging an ad in your sale barn. I'll guarantee you they give you $10,000 a piece to they'll have a little to say about something. And as I think any of you that probably went to the NCBA convention, from what I heard, or here in the last week or so would say that it kind of looked like corporate America showed up to kind of handle things down there. So if that's right, I'd like to listen to more of it. I might tell you a little some things about us. You know, it's a funny thing. You people out here I get so disgusted at these pharmaceutical companies and seed companies because they're always advocating retained ownership and things like that. And this last year, I know quite a few people that completely lost their calf crop through retained ownership. You people out here in Montana and us in South Dakota have a product to sell. Most generally, it's grass. You've all got grass, I assume, out there, a lot of you. I gather that's the cheapest game we can put on. That's what we're trying to produce. If this thing was such a great thing, this owning your cattle right on through feedlot, do you think these feeders would be asking us to put our cattle in there? This is what I always discuss with me about this thing. Why not let everybody make a little money? If this thing is all right, and you cattle feeders that are feeding the cattle, shouldn't be no problem feeding cattle. But our own organization has said that these pharmaceutical companies on the board, they're not going to promote anything to mess around with other parts of our industry. Yet here they are promoting this retained ownership and things like this. Also, I'm getting a little short of time here. I want to mention just a few of the other things. Through the years, we've had quite a lot of things that the NCA has been promoting that I don't think was in the best interest of the cattle producers. First of all, about 10 years ago, the NCA membership was voted on delisting the futures. They voted 80% to delist the futures. Yet when they got out I believe it was Reno and the Pat, they didn't. We had all the cowboy lawyers and the commodity people them show up, and they voted to not only not delist them. A little later, they come up with where they increased them 15-fold. Then the numerous times voting not to have the factors investigated, and then number 3 is trying to strategic align and vertically integrate complete elimination of price discovery through the guise of value-based marketing. Also been a big advocate of NAFTA. They keep saying, well, we don't want to be an isolationist. What's wrong with taking care of ourselves first? Now here's the situation. They're going to send $125 or $135 million down to Mexico so they can come up and buy our cattle. Have any of your youngsters, or any of your people that are on the ranch with you that are young people, tried to borrow any money from FHA? You know what? They haven't got any money. That is not a hell of a thing that they're going to send $125 or $35 million to Mexico to come up and buy our cattle. What would be wrong with distributing through our FHA offices and let some of these young people try to get a little start? There's no way these people can get started. Look at the age group that's sitting here in our audience. Now, I tell you what, I'd be probably one of the younger fellows, and so would you, and so would you. We got grandkids. Is that what we want for our grassroots people out here in the country? They're going to roll up our sidewalks. Just through this darn thing we've got going right now. And I think we ought to have a little more input from our organization. Now, this the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. They've also not wanted to have labeling imported meat. I thought this was a darn right disgrace too. We sat down in Washington, D.C., and there we had 2 of the NCA guys get up and stand and say, well, we can't label this meat. Well, why not? Look at your cap, look at your shirt, look at your boots. They're made in Mexico, Japan, Taiwan, Korea. Why not label this meat? They keep telling us about quality and consistency. You want us to check our meat, do more things with this beef, check off dollar and all this and that. Why should I have to pay my $1 a head to check on what's wrong with Mexican beef? Or the Canadian beef? You know, all they have to do is bring them cattle into Dakota City or Greeley. Out of the other side, they come out of there and they're automatically USDA choice or select or what else. I think that's a heck of a thing. This guy come up and said, well, the reason we won't label it is because it's blended. Well, label it blended. You know. But I can tell you about a fellow that went to that killed some beef and put it in his store. And they had the beef all there, and he just took one section and put an Australian sticker on it to see what difference it made. It said imported from Australia. Same stuff as the rest of it, only it said imported from Australia in this section. You know what he done? He sold 14 times American beef before he sold the other. And that's got to tell you a little something. I don't think we have to be ashamed of our product. Why the hell are they so ashamed of that stuff out of Canada and Mexico and stuff like that? Well, that took up about enough of your time right now, but I'm telling you right one thing about it, that we've started a petition drive in South Dakota early this spring on to bring the checkoff to a referendum. On the 30th of January, the NCBA formed a new organization, or the NCA formed a new organization called the NCBA, which merged with the beef checkoff. The vote at the NCA annual meeting was by a show of hands, and only NCA members could vote. Only 904 people voted out of approximately 40,000 membership. There was no absentee ballots or nothing like that. But you had to be a member of NCA. Now the USDA tells us there's 1,200,000 cattle producers who pay the mandatory checkoff, $1 per head. This annually constitutes about $80 to $85 million. Does this look like a fair election to you? We had 1,199,000 producers never even had the opportunity to vote on what to do with their money. How's that for democracy? This is less than 1/10 of 1% of all the cattle producers. Early this spring, I had a young man come in after one of our sales. He was feeling pretty bad. He said, "You know, Johnny," he said, "I'd like to know how to get my check-off dollar back. I said I paid you $220 to check off this morning." And he said, "I lose $27,000 in the cattle." He said, "A month and a half ago," he said, "sold 350 of them. I lose 30,000. He said, "I'm out of business." He said, "You know one thing? That $220 would feed my family for 3 weeks." And he said, "I'd like to figure out how I'd like to give something so I could give it back to him." So we can't do that. He said, "Why not?" He said, "Here Burger King comes out and advertises bringing in 220,000 metric tons of beef." Now he said, "I sold all them calves and I had about 10 head of cows. He said, they bring 30 cents or less. Now how damn much cheaper does it have to get?" So that's when we went to our South Dakota Livestock Auction Market Association and talked about it. And our people decided to go with the beef checkoff to bring it to a vote. South Dakota, we have our petitions at every barn. On this checkoff, this thing it says that we would, if you'd like to bring the beef checkoff to a vote of the producers, whether it's yes or no, sign this checkoff or sign this petition. On the other side, we've got another poll that sits there that says, if you think the NCBA and the beef checkoff is doing a good job, sign this. So it gives you both sides of it. To this date, this thing is running over 98% people want to vote on the checkoff. Now, it's not so much that we want to lose the checkoff. It's that we're against the people that are running it. We think it needs to be back in the hands of the grassroots people that are paying the dollar. That's why we've done this. I want to tell you one last thing. My friends, you raise the greatest products in the world. The cleanest, highest quality, most expected meat that money can buy. Why should we let the checkoff people, the NCA, and the 3 greedy corporations use it against us? Our Congressman Tim Johnson has a bill in Congress right now that will prohibit non-competitive competition. It wants to put in mandatory price reporting. It also wants to put in labeled meat from where it's origin. I think this needs to be backed by all the ranchers in the country. Yet, NCBA is not backing this bill. So with that, I took up enough of your time. And Rick, thank you for your time, and thank you both.
I've never been anybody's conscience before. You guys are all watching me like, oh my God. Yeah, we're in trouble, aren't we? Yeah. Before we go any further, I do want to let you know that there's members of Livestock Press here. Here in our part of the world, I don't know how it works in South Dakota, but it's the same. We work hand in hand. And I would like to recognize the Livestock Press that's in the room that I know about, and if I miss somebody, I'm going to apologize right up front. Linda Grosskopf sitting here in the front with the Agri-News. Linda, would you stand up for those of you that read her articles? You can talk to her a little later. She does a great job. Brent, where did you go? There he said. Brent Stanghelle, KMON Radio out of Great Falls, Montana. And of course, my year-older partner, Mr. Taylor Brown. For those of you that haven't said happy birthday to him yet, please do so. Put my job on the line one more time. What the heck, huh? With that, this next man needs no introduction in this room by any means. He's a man that you see at from county fairs to his auction block to purebred sales to almost every cattle event that you'll attend here in this region. You'll see Pat Goggins on hand. Would you welcome Pat Goggins here tonight, Pat?
Well, thank you a lot, Rick. You know, I've been assigned a subject about NAFTA, GATT, and the P&S Law 21. I think probably a lot of that is a big problem as we could have. And Leo, we did have a quota on imported beef here in the United States until the passage of GATT. That's what was thrown out. So we used to have one. I can well remember it. And NCA did a lot of battling, did a great job in holding that together, and I always liked the way they did it. It helped a lot. At least kept a cap on the idea that they can flood us when we really don't need it. But you know, I looked some figures up. You've looked at so many figures, I'm not going to give you many more. But imports of Canadian cattle in the United States for the last 9 months, 1st October to July 6th, 1,158,496. Understand most all of those are captive supply or packer owned when they come across that line. They are not free fall, what I call free fall or open market cattle. They're placed, if you don't believe that, go into some of the major packing plants on some Monday morning when the Canadians are lined up, and if you're a local around there, you won't get any cattle into the line to kill that day. They're killing all pretty much their imported captive cattle. Canada, I like Canada. I used to sell a lot of sales up there. I said used to. And you have to remember that all the people of Canada, all of them, the whole nation, doesn't represent the population of California. And yet they've got one of the most productive, beautiful black soils and those prairie soils of Western Canada you will ever see. The only thing that's kept that country from exploding in production of meat has been a market. Now they have one, it appears. A year ago, we got 1,600,000 and some odd cattle out of old Mexico. They had a drought, they had money problems, granted. And we had a lot of Mexican cattle come here before GATT or NAFTA came along. True, not that many. But we're still suffering and have been up through July for the massive amount of those light cattle that got double grassed and then ended up in feedlots because the wheat wasn't any good, and it kind of jolted us pretty hard on numbers here this year. First, so the total imports this year from Canada and Mexico is 1,705,437. That's for 9 months. You realize this is going to represent, if it keeps going, 6% of the national kill. The national kill in America. Economists tell us it only takes 2%. 2%. Too many or 2% too few to move a market up or move a market down. So you can see how when that 6% is in the hands of the folks that buy the rest, it's pretty easy for them to make that market work most any way they want it, most any given week. So far, the last 3 months, 26% up, 96 over 95 out of Canada. If you've been out on the roads very much between the state of Washington, or Idaho, or Montana, or North Dakota, or Minnesota, there's some probably doing that. And I know that a lot of people, as mentioned here, 2, 3 speakers, and it keeps coming up, and I've been blasphemed some by friends of mine and people that are in high places in the livestock trade that say, Pat, you cannot put a circle, you cannot put a fence around America and be objectively contented with yourself and expect to have this country move on. To a degree, I buy that. We've got to have trade. We always have been a great trading nation. But we're getting out-traded. That I don't like. We've got far too many people up the line with fancy hair and shiny faces and maybe pretty good educations from institutions of fame that don't know anything about trade. They'll trade away their soul if they can get another vote. And that's a lot what's wrong with this. You look at Japan. You look at Japan. You know there's always been ways. There's been no noticeable tariffs, lots of kinds. But invariably there are penalties, concessions, subsidies, advantages, hidden or visible. They're imposed by governments or business interests to give the home team the advantage. You don't believe that? Look at Japan. You think they're a free trade nation? Look at the deficits. You read about it. That's planned on the part of Japan. And we're pretty gullible. Now they're bringing factories over here and building plants and putting them together, and we all pat a thing on the back. Look at what I've done. Look what a wonderful job they're doing. Why are they doing it? Because our wages are cheaper than they are in Japan. That's the only reason that they're doing it. Japan has never had any intention whatsoever of playing on a level field. Why do you think the countries of GATT and NAFTA, they don't have any result either? Look, we're in GATT over there in the European community. They will not take our American beef under the supposition that we've got too much hormone in it, so they won't accept it. And they've agreed now the other day, wonderful, I say, wonderful, they're going to meet again in 1999. But they're still not going to take any of our beef. And yet we get their canned stuff and all of their saleable products to us, almost free fall. Almost free fall. And you look at these tennis shoes, go down to the southeast or east. I know some pretty nice people there that have closed shop. What is a shoe manufacturer? Closed up. He and his father and grandfather been 80 years making shoes, tennis shoes, every kind of a shoe. Closed up. Where's the shop? Where does the hierarchy of the place go? Taiwan. And those Nike shoes, those wonderful basketball shoes that Jordan and others wear, the hair deals, whatever they call them, they cost $120-some here in the United States. You know what the cost of that shoe laid into the coast of the United States in American money? Less than $6. Our beef's kind of being handled the same way. You know, what would you think? Put yourself in that. You people are thinking people. You aren't. We wouldn't have the crowd we got. A lot of good thinkers around. And I think all of us need to battle this thing. What would you think if you called it free trade, if in a situation where a government would subsidize a product or a crop or whatever so that the United States can compete with foreign producers whose costs are lower? Big deal, isn't that something? That's like wetting your pants on a cold day to keep warm. Lasts about as long. Many of the do-gooders, the government bureaucrats, blaspheme me, and lots of others. They who say America first. Now I'll tell you what, you look at Switzerland, the soundest nation on this globe. I'll guarantee you it's Switzerland first in every trade. Germany's that way. Japan's that way. Billings that way. You trade them Johnny Bulls over there, you'll find out. England's first. The Irishman's too busy fighting, he don't even trade. Let me give you an example. 3 weeks ago in eastern Canada, you may have read about this. There's a big wahoo putt going on. The people in eastern Canada felt that there was far too much chicken parts and dairy products going north. They get a hold of NAFTA, and it does allow to have a discerning board. They called it 2 Canadians, 2 Americans, and a British. Yeah, British. What's he doing on there? He's there. And Flack turned it down. It's going to cost the dairy industry of the eastern United States $1 billion a year. The chicken parts people, 300 million is the report. If that's the case, why can't we get a hold of NAFTA? Why can't we in the western United States call up one of these boards? And what the heck, I didn't have an Irishman on there. Get the board and let them look at this thing. If we've got too many cattle in America, if we've oversupplied, and Canada and Mexico, especially from the north, can literally dump these cattle on top of us at a time when we're already overloaded, then let's leave what this board says over here. Why does it have to be back in the French division of the outfit? I know they run the country, but at least they did it. Why can't it happen in Western Canada and with the United States? You know, there's a lot of definitions floating around about GATT and NAFTA. Both of them are very close votes in Congress, you know. And I'm going to suggest that it will come up in Congress in a big way after the woo-ha-ha is done with here this year. It's going to come up with there in Congress because there's a lot of heat. There's a lot of people getting heat, big time, over what you've heard before about jobs that are lost, industries that are being ruined. And it was a federal law. It was an international law passed by our federal government, our Congress. And there's that same Congress can change it. They put it in, they can redo it and make it right. You know, Betsy reminded me of misunderstandings. Betsy was at the Christmas Christmas party, and boy, everybody was having a great time, and she got pretty well organized, and in fact, very well. And the Harvey was an office manager around there. She couldn't manipulate well, and he offered to drive her home. Well, golly, she thought that would sure be all right. And after she gave an address, everything, how to get home, one thing, where to get there, they drove 10, 15 minutes and kept going. She leaned over and kind of just a little bit, you know. And she says, "You're passionate." Harv was a single fellow, and his eyes got big, and he thought, well, yeah. So his hand kind of went towards her hip, and wham, she hit him right side of the head. Then he straightened up, straightened the car up, and drove a little further. A lot of silence, and finally, pretty soon, she got over and nuzzled up, and she says, "Harv, you're passionate." Gosh, she looked over, and she kind of was really got the look in her eye, one thing another. And so he kind of made a little move there, and wham, right across the mouth. And he pulled over and stopped, and he said, "Now look here, honey, I've had enough of this." He said, "You keep coming on to me like I'm sexy, and then I really come up. What are you doing? Every time I do anything, you smash me right across the face. What are you talking about?" She kind of looked up at him and bubbled her eyes a little bit, and she said, "I never said anything about you being sexy at all. I was trying to tell you how you're passionate." I think it's really time. I think it's time. You know, I for me, happen to believe we need a strong national livestock organization. We need strong state organizations. I, for one, am not here to bash them at all. I am here to bash them for some of the things they're doing. There's too much coming from the top, coming down. At Knoxville, they just had a situation on the grade change. They want to throw out all the grading of the United States. You know, I say the logo, the password of American beef is USDA choice. It means a lot worldwide. We've taken a lot of years to get it there. They want to throw it out with the help of Bill Helming and a few others who are promoting it. And the Packers, would they like this? Then they'd have just their label, their idea. And there would be no U.S. time or choice or select, nothing. It's all that whatever I call it within that product. I say the devil with that. Anybody that wouldn't fight that isn't thinking. That comes from the top down. That idea. We need to continue to have the good ideas, work through the state conventions, and up through the resolutions committees, and on to the state, and then to the national, work from the grassroots up. A lot of cattle people, I know lots of them. Many of them won't stand up in front of people and say much, but I'm telling you, they're the thinkingest buggers you ever saw. You're not going to throw a curveball past them more than once. And I respect it. And the national should respect it. You know, NAFTA and GATT have got to be retooled. The DNS Act of 1921, Mike's going to touch on it. I have to be involved in a lawsuit with he and others. I'm going to Amarillo tomorrow. I'm going to meet down there Friday morning. It's hopefully a pretty high-powered deal. But I'm saying this, we don't need any new laws. Not one new law. Because within the Packers and Stockyards Act of 1921, there's language there that prohibits, and it was, of course, redone in '86, but there's language there that prohibits them from doing what they're doing. Like Bob Peterson, the CEO of Iowa Beef. He said not too many, 3 years ago I think it was, he said, we don't want to feed cattle. We do not feed cattle now. But if all the other packers are going to feed cattle, and they're going to get involved with this, he said, I can promise you IBP will feed, and we'll be good at it. And are they all good? And if they are, I'm not taking anything from them. The people are tremendous merchandisers. We need them on our team, but we need them to stay in place. I, as a stockyards owner, I cannot own any interest in a commercial cattle feeding venture. Why? Because they feel that I might try to buy the cattle cheaper from our customers and put them out into a lot like that. Probably a pretty good law. I, as a stockyards operator, I cannot own any interest in a packing company. Now, I tried. I mean, it's a long story, but because the same thing. The same thing. Now, come on the large packers. They're merchandisers. They're buyers. They're sellers. They're in commercial feedlot industries. Iowa Beef got took on by Packers and Stockyards Act some years ago, the state of Washington. Them 5 big, huge lots. They still have that in place. They're captive lots. They get all the cattle out of those lots. Nobody else can bid on it. I don't care. And there was 9 small packers who used to be out in that area. Pretty vibrant people. There's now 2. Maybe I should say 1.5. One ain't hardly making it. But I'm telling you, it's broken. Now, we can't have that. If I, in Billings, Montana, can't go down and buy a packing plant that's defunct, and I had a total operating team put together, I wasn't going to run it. But I had to sign the credit line. You happen to know what that is. The credit line in a packing business is big. I had to sign it. Because I signed it, Bill Jones, who was then the head of the DNS in Washington, D.C. He used to work for us in the newspaper. He was our editor. Bill's a fine guy. He seen it come across the desk, called me up, said, Pat, if you go through with that, I'm got to jerk your license on that auction company. I fought him and I tried, but I lost. Now, if I can't do it, just a lowly sod buster in Montana, why should, how come, why is it that they can do it at the national level and keep us under the thumb like they are? And baby, we're under the thumb. And if we don't get this corrected, there's going to be some things happen that none of us are going to like in the years to come. Believe when I tell you we need help. And Mike will be talking about it. Get behind, I got to say this in the last. I know that John Lacey is doing, he's a cattleman out of California, good friend of mine, I know him good. He's working his heart out. But he does have some people over him, and a and I want to say an attorney in Omaha who's calling all the shots, who's running all the show, that was never selected. Never selected. You're going to hear a lot more about that. It is over. But I'm telling you, it's tearing. I hate to see the NCBA, National Capital, get tore up this way. But something's got to jerk them up. They've got to change that structure. They've got to be liable to the cattle people and the independent cattle feeders of this nation. And if what happens, if what Johnny says would happen, if we lose that dollar head check, if they don't do some changing, we could lose it. 94% of the, nearly 94% of the funds to operate this nationally is coming from that buckethead checkoff. We don't want to lose that. Where are we back? We're 100 years behind. We don't want to lose that, but some we got to get their attention. I think if we get the packers doing the packing business, the feeders doing the feeding business, and the cowman doing the cowman business, you just watch and see. We'll all get along a lot better, and we'll get rid of a lot of this rife and struggle and problems that I don't like that's going on between state organizations, national organizations, packers, feeders, not to mention lastly but the banker. He don't like it either. You've got to help us, people, and it's up to you to help. It isn't just a few of us. You've got to help. Thanks.
That brings us to the last of our panelists for this evening, and just ahead of the question and answer session. Mike Calicrate was in our offices about 3 weeks ago, I believe, when I first got to meet him. I find him an interesting individual to discuss this problem with, because as a cattle feeder, he stepped out on a limb, and trust me, there's not very many cattle feeders that will step out there on that limb and start sawing it off behind them when it comes time to do business like he's trying to do business against the big three. Would you welcome from St. Francis, Kansas, Mike Calicrate.
Thank you, Rick. Appreciate being here tonight. Leo, could I get that first overhead? I'm a cattle feeder from St. Francis, Kansas. Been in the business about 20-some years. It's all I think about. I love it. It's really all I want to do is feed cattle. About 10 years ago, we had a meeting in Kansas. The KLA and Robert Peterson, the man on the bottom of the screen here, was there and spoke to us. And he had a real problem. He said, I got to have some relief. He said, ConAgra and Cargill are feeding cattle. They got captive supplies. They've got an advantage over us. And you heard it earlier in the meeting tonight that he made the comment that we're going to get in the cattle feeding business or something. And Pat and I were talking about this earlier, and that something is what he got in. And it's the formula. And it's allowed him to make some money. And we're going to talk about that in just a minute. But one of the things that I've really focused on here is some motivation. on May 20th in Amarillo, Texas. We got together, there was about 20-some cattlemen there, Johnny and Herman, several others from around the country. And we decided that we didn't think we had a whole lot of choice other than to just file a lawsuit. The laws were on the books. They weren't being enforced. We thought we had a good case, and the attorneys were there and encouraged us to do it. Since that meeting, we're not taking the credit, but we've had about a $15 rally in the cattle market, in the live cattle market. $1 in the live cattle market is about $2 on the feeder market, on the calf market. So we've come a long way, just bringing awareness. When Bob Gotch sued IBT 2 years ago in 1994, we saw about a $10 rally in the market in 11 days. Did get their attention. Didn't get their attention as much the second time, but it certainly got it the first time. As soon as that pressure was relieved by that $11 or $10 market increase, the support for our lawsuit vanished. There was 1,500 cattlemen met in Omaha, Nebraska, and it was really some kind of meeting. You wouldn't have believed the outpouring of support at that meeting, but most of them cattle feeders, very few calf operators. And I said at that time, I don't think this thing can fly. I don't think it's got the support. The cattleman hasn't felt the pain yet. There's a pool of money between you getting low prices and the feedlots receiving low prices, and it's called our equity. We're shooters, we're risk takers. We go out there and we buy calves from Montana ranches with a loss in them the day we do it, hoping things are going to get better, hoping corn gets cheaper, hoping something happens that we can make some money. And that's to your benefit. Today, we haven't been paid. Our equity pool is gone, and we can't pay you. Now you're feeling the pain. But few of you really understand why. And I'm amazed. And a lot of that is because you're not getting correct information. And I don't want to be the one to tell you that our cattlemen organizations are giving you false information, but they are. And we're going to hit on that just a little bit. Bob Peterson says there's no stopping concentration. This is an evolution that's going to take place in spite of whoever is in the way. I'm in the way. And I may just get run over, but I guarantee I'm going to try.